Well, thank you so much, Eve, for being here today. Eve is an alum of Marlborough, part of the class of 1976. And she is a composer and a performer with the most incredible list of awards and accolades and really impressive, unique projects that I feel like are just so different from what you normally hear about, the way you combine like literature and geography and all of these different things into your music. It's so interesting. So I'm excited to get into all of it today. Um, so first, I would love to hear more, kind of going back to what brings all of us together, our time at Marlborough and the connection as alums. What was your time here like, and what were some of your kind of favorite memories or teachers or things that you still remember?
Yeah, I I came a year late to Marlborough. I went to John Thomas Dye out on the far west side for seventh grade, and so I joined Marlborough in eighth grade. And and what I remember is the teachers were incredible. I
Mhm.
really enjoyed, like I was a total science nerd, and biology with Mr. Rigby and chemistry with Mr. Sandstrom, and geology. Dr. Barnes was his name, I think.
Mm. Yeah, Leland
Was
Barnes.
cool. And and also, like, I studied Latin with Miss Carnes, this venerable woman, quite quite strict and cool. Um, and then, of course, there was also Lynn Bielefeld was a music person, and JT was the accompanist, and they were incredible. And we did like Sondheim and Benjamin Britten and like really cool stuff, like really wonderful rep. Um, and so that was super fun. Um, and and I have a special warm place in my heart for Lee Walcott, who taught art history, but he was also my advisor or something
Mm.
like that. I don't remember how those things are structured.
Mhm.
So like all of that was really awesome. And, I made good friends there, people I'm still in touch with and love dearly, and all of that. Um, but I was also kind of, I think I want to say, alienated by the sort of general culture of the place in those days, which came from the administration. And so I felt not very good about the structure of the place and the sort of overall culture of the place,
Mm.
even though I had these really positive experiences,
Mhm.
in my classes and with my classmates and stuff like that. Um, I felt like I got defined as rebellious in
Mm.
a certain way. Um, and and that the fact that I wasn't, the ways that I was unconventional or didn't fit were perceived as problematic by the administration. And it's a small enough school that that has a real impact.
Mhm.
Um, and in a way, it taught me lessons that formed my life, because I grew up to mistrust authority and sort of chafe against authority. And in a way, that started at Marlborough. And in certain ways, that's had a positive outcome for me. I feel like, you know, the fact that I reflexively assume that people in authority do not have my best interests at heart, um, was actually a useful way for me to live my life, given that I'm not on the straight and narrow. Um, and so I don't hold it against them, given
Uh-huh.
how things turned out. Like, but at the time, it was really frustrating. And I
Yeah.
really felt like, wow, like, I'm a straight A student. I'm going to an Ivy League school. Like, what do you want from me? Like,
Right.
so, but it felt as if they wanted someone who fit more comfortably in their idea of what a young woman should behave like, or how she should function in the world, or
Mhm.
something. And it's hard for me to know what that was, but there it is, you know?
Yeah. No, I appreciate you sharing that. And I'm so glad that you still, despite that, had people here that you can remember fondly who were allies and were supporters and people who encouraged you to stay as you were and be who you wanted to be. I know that can be incredibly hard at any point in life to struggle with like not fitting into someone's ideal version of what they think you should be. And um, I think it says a lot about you that you're able to reflect on it now as a positive, that it was something that really set you up nicely. But you know, I would like to think things have changed here, obviously, but you know, I'm not a student here, so I can't speak for them. But
I
so
really hope so.
yeah, yes, definitely.
You know,
Yes,
things,
the
and,
culture has changed a lot.
you know,
Yeah. Um, So let's talk about music. So you did mention your music teachers here. Were you already a performer and playing instruments before you started here? Did that start here? Did it start after? Just like kind of take us through that
yeah,
process.
yeah. My father was a composer. My mother was a pianist and harpsichordist. My grandfather on my mother's side was a musician as well. So I grew up in a deeply musical family, and I learned to read music at the same time I learned to read books. And my father was the dean of the School of Performing Arts at the University of Southern California. So, so like, they would give dinner parties, and, great musicians, classical musicians would come over for dinner. And that was just the milieu that I grew up in, right? And so in a way, school gave me the opportunity to sort of broaden my interests. And as I say, I got really interested in science at Marlborough. And I actually went to Princeton thinking I was going to do brain science. That was my plan. And I had taken enough AP stuff that I could have graduated in 3 years. I mean, it was like crazy
Wow.
deeply I had gone into that. Um, But by October of my freshman year at Princeton, I was like, oh my God, I've made a terrible mistake, because I had taken for granted the milieu that I was living in, and the
Mm,
fact that music was absolutely central to everyday life. It was just part of the air I breathed, literally.
hmm.
And so, and yes, I had played the piano, I had played the cello, I had, sang in all the choirs in school and stuff. And so I I knew I wanted to switch my focus. Um, but actually I couldn't start the theory sequence at Princeton until my sophomore year. And so it was kind of great because I had this year of exploration at
Mm,
Princeton before I focused in on music, which served me really well. Again, going forward, like at the time, I felt like, oh my God, I'm way behind and I'm so remedial, because like when you're 20, 1 year seems like an
yeah.
eternity, you know?
Yeah.
But in retrospect, that was also kind of a gift. I took all these philosophy courses. I studied the history and philosophy of science. I met T.S. Kuhn and studied with him. And, he's the guy who wrote the Structures of Scientific Revolutions and a
Mm,
Paradigm Shift and all that. It was great. It was really great. And then I settled into music really seriously and spent the rest of my 3 years undergrad doing music. And I wrote music as my senior thesis, and then immediately went to grad school at Columbia, because I felt like, again, I was behind. And so I needed 2 more years in a sense of undergraduate-ish life, although I was taking grad courses at Princeton in music by the end of my time there. So it was
mm.
like you know, I was really, really immersed after that initial sort of period of thinking I was doing science. I
Right.
sort of wholeheartedly did music.
Wow. And may I ask, was that something your dad, especially as as like a leader in this at USC, was that something he fully supported, that switch?
It was, I mean, it's such an interesting thing because music is a huge field
Hmm.
and there are very different ways of approaching being a musician, right? And I had grown up with the values that if you're going to be a musician, you need to spend 5 hours a day in a practice room every day because that's what it means to be a virtuoso musician. And I had not done that, for sure had not done that. I had certainly done music, but not on that level of like single-minded focus. And in fact, I've never been somebody who spends 5 hours a day in the practice room ever. Like that's not what I'm doing as a musician. Is not about that kind of technical virtuosity. Um, that just doesn't capture my particular. It doesn't scratch my particular itches, you know.
Hmm.
And and so in a way, I think he felt me to be insufficiently serious and committed.
Mm.
And it took him a while to realize that I had a different project. I was doing something different in music. And he came to really respect and appreciate what I was doing. And that meant the world to me because I loved and respected my father very much. Um, but it wasn't instantaneous. It wasn't like, oh, great, you're going into the family business.
Right,
No.
right. Which is funny how sometimes that can happen where the parents are like, actually, no, this is not what I want for you.
Right.
Um, but it's something that you've been around so much of your, young life. Um, so what were some of those moments then after you made that switch and maybe in grad school or after that where you feel like were really pivotal moments that laid that foundation for your future success in your career in music?
Well, part of it was, um, to be honest, I really hated the grad program at Columbia. And that was, again, sort of an odd gift because what it made clear to me is that I did not want to continue and get a PhD right away. So I quit after the master's degree. I quit going to school. And and that was sort of for two reasons. Well, it was mainly because I didn't want to get the credentials that would allow me to be a professor, because that would then put me on the path of getting, because most composers of the kind, experimental music or whatever, the normal way to make a living is as a professor. And I
Right.
watched my father go from being a professor to being an administrator and sort of stop composing. And
Right.
I was like, I don't need to take that path. Like, that's not the path for me. I want to figure out how to be a composer in America without having a faculty position somewhere. And so I quit purposely so that I wouldn't be tempted, because once I had the credentials, it would be then at that
Um,
time easy for me to get a professorial job somewhere.
really
And
challenging yourself there. Don't even want to give yourself the option.
it's out of the question. And and um and I got lucky because I started producing records um of other people's music, which was a great learning experience for me. I studied conducting privately with this bizarre, wonderful Frenchman named Jacques-Louis Monod, who changed my life. Like, he was so amazing and gave me skills that were really special to
Mhm.
have, that allowed me to do sort of really complicated music and produce really complicated music successfully. Um, and then I got in sort of on the ground floor of the audiobook industry, which
Hmm.
subsidized my composing life for 15 years because I was on the ground floor And that allowed me to buy digital technology for editing and mixing and stuff like that really early on. I was an early adopter of Pro Tools, editing software and stuff like that. And also, it was also emotionally important because I realized when you're doing something in other fields, you become senior pretty quickly, right? It doesn't take long to be senior. Are you still there? Yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
Sorry. Whereas composing, it takes a long time to be a senior composer. It takes decades, And so, I was producing Stephen King audiobooks and Anne Rice audiobooks and all, these best-selling authors, and working with celebrity actors and doing all this fun
Oh,
stuff,
wow.
within 5 years, because that's how it works. And so that was sort of emotionally satisfying because my composing life grew very slowly because I'm doing something on the margins,
Mhm.
and and so that was super helpful somehow to
Yeah.
have that balance between the two things. And I quit doing audiobooks around the turn of the millennium,
Okay.
because by that time my composing life had grown and expanded and solidified in such a way that I knew I could make a living, just from commissions and performances and royalties and publications and all that
Right.
other stuff. So
That's great that you were able to find that alternative like revenue stream to help you continue doing other things that you love too. That's like, I think, the best case scenario.
yeah, yeah, it's
Um, so then so your experiences such as like kayaking the Mississippi River, which is what Pam Keon told me about when we started talking about, bringing you on as an Aiming High speaker. I was so intrigued about this. How did these sorts of ideas of bringing like physical experiences or visual experiences into music, and like what is that process like for you? Because it seems like you've done it now more than once with like nature and these travels, and then translating them into music. How did that start? How did that idea come about? And like, what is that process like?
yeah. Well, so I had been in New York writing music, performing music, part of this whole New York scene for like, well, let's see. I went down the river in 2009, right? So prior to that, um, certainly literature and external ideas, non-musical ideas, gave me ideas for music I wanted to write. Like that's sort of always been true.
Mhm.
But the River Project in particular was sort of a new direction for me. Um, and it grew out of actually sort of a confluence of three things that happened. I like that I said confluence, that's good. Um, um, and one of them was, in 2008, the crash, the financial crash really put a pall over New York City, which is, after all, the financial center of the country. And so people were really anxious, and you could feel it in the
Mhm.
air. It was really uncomfortable. So there was that. There was the election of Obama, which felt like the country had turned a corner into a new direction that I wanted to understand and experience and get out into the country and
Hmm.
experience what that was like. Um, and the third thing was a sort of delayed reaction to the incredible entrenched structural racism of our country that Hurricane Katrina made clear.
Mhm.
I mean, it was impossible not to see that. And those three things together felt like what I wanted to do was a sort of one person WPA project. During the Depression, Roosevelt put together something called the Works Progress Administration. And one of the the aspects of it was that they hired artists and paid them to go out into the country and document the state of the country.
Hmm.
That was how they paid artists during the Depression who otherwise would not have food on the table. And many artists, like for example, Eudora Welty, she took photographs of rural Mississippi during that period as part of the WPA project. So it wasn't that she was hired to be a writer, she was hired to be a photographer and document. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to do a one-person WPA project, and I'm going to paddle down the Mississippi River, which is the spine of the country. Like you can't get more core to America than the Mississippi River, which is the watershed for 2/3 of the country. Um, and see what I see and experience what I experience, and then write music responding to that experience. And so that became the idea. And I decided pretty quickly that I would also bring a bike, because there would be periods that I'd want to bike rather than paddle, and also to invite people to come with me, so that I wouldn't be doing this extreme thing alone, but that I would have company. And so I basically just sent out an email to my entire email list and said, if you want to come, like you're welcome, and I've set the whole thing up, and you can come and join for a few days or a week or a month, whatever works for you. And that worked out beautifully, because I basically had companions, a sort of ever shifting group of companions, the whole way down the river. And what it meant was that on any given day, one of us would take the kayak, one of us would take the bike, and the other person would drive the car and find the campsite for the evening and be in charge of the meal, like that. And so you took a solo trip during the day, and then you had company in the evening.
Oh, that's so nice.
Yeah, it's my idea of a perfect life.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Truly.
Yeah.
Were there parts of the Mississippi River, I don't know like the whole length of it, what it's like? Is it like whitewater rafting type, like level of power, or is it pretty mellow the whole way?
The first half of the river is basically a series of lakes, because there are locks. Well, the very beginning of the river is like a stream. And in fact, the kayak I had is 17 feet long. It was like driving a Cadillac through, some tiny Italian hill town. It was like insane, completely insane. But like pretty quickly, water starts adding. And by the time you get to Minneapolis, say, it's a real river. I mean, but there are very few currents until you get to the free-flowing river, which happens just above St. Louis. So you're really paddling every stroke, because there are locks and dams. And so it's like lake, and then there's a lock, and you go down a number of feet. And it's kind of amazing, because there are these locks and it's free, and they will send you through in a single kayak, and they'll do this whole crazy thing with thousands of gallons of water.
Right.
One person, like it's their job, it's kind of amazing.
What a cool experience. It's so unique.
Yeah. And then once you get to St. Louis, it's a free-flowing river, and it gets dangerous, because there's also a lot more boat traffic. And by the time you get to Cairo, which is where the Ohio River joins the Mississippi, then it really turns into a super high. I mean, there are like all these barges, towboats with barges, that are like multiple football fields in length.
Wow.
That cannot stop and cannot see you. And they're like tree trunks going down the river, and and the sides of the river have all this stuff to sort of prevent erosion.
Hmm.
So you can't paddle right next to the shore, and you can't paddle in the boat channel, in the navigation channel, or you will die, you
Right.
know. So basically, after Memphis, I did a whole lot more biking and a
Yeah.
whole lot less paddling, because it's just, you're taking your life in your hands. And I'm
Yeah.
not really an extreme sports person. That's not my thing, you
Yeah.
know.
And your friends were like, I don't know if this is what we signed up for.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, so do you feel, and in what ways, if so, that the cycle of people coming through the whole trip, how that affected the way the music ended up like coming together, like through your experiences at night with them and all the different type of people you got to see, maybe old friends, that you haven't spent time with like that.
Yeah, I mean, part of it was the people, my companions on the journey, but more of it was the people I met.
Okay.
Because I met all kinds of sort of marvelous people. And the thing with doing a journey like that, especially because all day you're traveling alone, and just like whenever you travel alone, I'm sure all of us have had the experience that the moment you're alone and you're obviously a traveler, people talk to you, and people tell you secrets.
Hmm.
It's like the role of a traveler is to be that journeyer, that person who can take in something of the experience of the person who is at home.
Hmm.
And it's a beautiful thing, and and so, you know, in Memphis, I met a boat captain named David Greer, who had come out to the boat launch just to check it out from shore, because he's one of the people moving those barges up and down the river, and
Oh,
he'd never seen this particular boat launch from the shore, and so he went out on a weekend, and we happened to meet, and he's like straight out of Mark Twain. He was born and raised in Mississippi. He's a poet. He knows every bend of the river. He knows the entire history of the river. He reads history so deeply. And we've been friends now for whatever it is, 15 years.
wow.
And he now is retired and lives in Arkansas. And I'm going down to visit him, in next month.
Yeah,
Like, he's family.
that's
And
amazing.
and so, and then, in oh my God, what's the name of that town? Friars Point, Mississippi, which is mentioned in a blues song. Um, 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 uh, I'm going out to Friars Point. I'm sorry, it'll come to me. Anyway, and I went out there and met a man named Sonny Ferris, who was just amazing, who ran this little sort of museum, and showed, that was like full of, you know, ancient farming implements, and
Oh,
really just strange, wonderful stuff. And we spent 3 hours together, and so, yeah, it was the people, the experiences of meeting people and hearing their stories and learning from them what their experience of place is, that
hmm.
sort of made all of this so rich for me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's such a special way to meet people. Um, and just, very few people really, even when we have the chance to travel throughout the United States or around the world, like connecting with locals is something that doesn't always happen. And I think it's where so much of the value lies in like the purpose of traveling and seeing all these places you've never been to. Um, so kind of moving on from that piece and that trip as a whole, looking at kind of your work, collaboration definitely seems to be a part of your creative process. So how do you feel the various collaborations that you've been able to do in all of your work? What do you find most rewarding about that? And just how do you feel that it really ends up like ultimately affecting the outcome?
Well, I think when you collaborate with other people, what happens is there's stuff in you and there's stuff in the other person. But when you interact, you create a space between you where something can arise that could never exist except in the space, the empty space that exists between the two of you.
Mhm.
And something new grows in that space that is neither yours or theirs, but grows from the relation that you've
Mhm.
made, the space that you've made, the net that holds you. And that is thrilling because it's both me and not me.
Mm.
And it gives me perspective on me, but it also is a surprise. It's a gift that comes and it feels like it's unbidden, but it comes from the trust and the attention that you've given to the space between you, you know?
Mhm.
Um, and and in a way, at best, that happens even if I'm, say, making a song from a poem by somebody else. I'm doing that with them, even though they're not in the room. They may be long dead,
Mm.
right? You
Yeah.
know, if I'm setting the words of Euripides or Sappho, like they're way dead, you know, and yet it's a collaboration. I'm not just replicating Sappho, nor am I ignoring Sappho. I'm making a space that exists somewhere between the two of us.
Mhm.
And that feels mystical. I
Mhm.
mean, you know,
Yeah.
it's because that person's way dead, you know,
Mhm.
and yet we're in the room together making this thing, you know.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's an interesting way to think about it too, with like you're not just collaborating with people who are in the room who can physically contribute their feedback and their ideas in that moment. It's more of like taking the works. I think that's really special, that you're able to kind of expand beyond just the living in that way and really open yourself up to so much more. Before we move on, I just want to let the attendees know to drop any questions in the Q&A for Eve. We'll make sure we have time for that, before we wrap up. Um, can you share, some other memorable experiences or moments that you felt really impacted your growth as an artist? Um, yeah, and your perspective as an artist.
Yeah, one of my most important collaborators was an experimental director, theater director named Lee Brewer, who is sort of legendary in New York experimental theater circles. He started a company called Mabu Minds, like I don't know, 60 years ago or whatever. And we worked together on a bunch of productions. And I remember the first time I worked with him uh, was on a play by one of the other members of Mabu Minds, Terry O'Reilly. And I really didn't know what to expect of Lee as a director. I'd never been in the room with him before. And it was the first day of rehearsal. And there was this new, young, fresh, very conscientious young stage manager who showed up for the first day of rehearsal also. And she says to Lee, let me know what the prop list is because I want to start getting to work immediately on, you know, speccing out the props and making sure that you have what you need, right? And he turned to her with a certain amount of heat. And he said, you know, if I knew the prop list on the first day of rehearsal, there would be absolutely no reason for us to rehearse. Right. And I just thought, okay, this is going to be an interesting ride. Like, okay. And I'm really glad I didn't say that, you know, because she was just like, oh my God, you know. And we proceeded to, the only way I can describe it is play for 6 weeks in the rehearsal room. And like anyone who had an idea could voice that idea and we would try it. And if it was interesting, we would keep it. And if it wasn't interesting, we would move on to the next idea. And there was this sense of absolute freedom, absolute lack of hierarchy. I'm talk about not an authoritarian setting, you know, it's such a marvelous way to work. Because like theater can be incredibly like fascist, you know, where the director is this and the assistant director is that, and the composer has this role and no other, you know. And with him, it was like, if I had an idea about something an actor could do, I would just say it and we would try it. And if it was a good idea, we would do it, you know. And the trouble is, in a way, it spoiled me. Like ever since, that's my idea of what it means to work and to collaborate, is to create a space where you can play. That's the job, you know. And you know, it also meant that very often by the time of opening, the piece wasn't finished yet, you know. But like, okay, so early audiences are seeing something that's still in formation, and it would solidify, you know. And we did one show that was a version of Dollhouse, you know, the Ibsen play, where the men, all the men in the cast were played by little people, and the women, the less power they had, the taller they were. So the tallest person in the show was the nursemaid, and she was on stilts. And the set was comfortable for the men, which meant that the women, including Nora, were on their hands and knees for basically the whole performance. And and were like, you know, incredibly uncomfortable. And it was just this sort of, and it was really an amazing production. And it toured internationally for like 10 years. And he was at every performance, and they would have rehearsals like ongoing, you know. And after it had been touring for 5 years, he's like, I'm still not happy with this nightmare scene, you know, musically. Can we rework this, you know? And we rewrote it 5 years into the tour, you know.
Wow.
Because that's like, that was the whole mentality, was your work is never done. You can always make it better. There's always more to learn from Ibsen. You know, it's not like we're going to use it up, you know. It's not like, you know. And it's a beautiful way to work, and it keeps everything fresh and vital, and audiences can feel that. I mean, you know that you're experiencing something that's happening today, now, in this moment, for this moment, and that's it, you know.
Yeah.
It's different tomorrow, you know.
Do you feel that you've been able to carry that approach through past that tour and past that time with him?
It's certainly my goal, you know. There's a way that he could live on the edge at a level that I'm not, you know. At a certain point, I'm like, you know, let's firm this up a little bit, you know, like, know what we're doing.
Yeah, the thought of opening without a finished piece, I don't even know really what that means or what that would feel like, but it gives me anxiety.
Terrifying, terrifying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. So we have a question from Norma Bowles, who's here.
Norma, hi, beloved Norma.
She says hello. She would love to know what's inspiring you now, and also what questions are you grappling with these days?
Okay. I maybe I'll start. Wow, which of those questions do I want to address first?
Sorry, I could have asked one at a time.
Yeah. Well, I'm resurrecting a project that I conceived of doing in the early 90s, which is an opera based on a historical figure about whom a book was written in the late 80s, who was a nun in Renaissance Italy who led her abbey to enclosure, which means made it an official abbey. It was a group of women, and then she led it to enclosure, which meant she knew how to deal with the authorities in Rome and all of that. And then she started having mystical visions and, you know, had stigmata and stuff like that. And so they came to examine her to find out what was going on, if maybe she was ready to be turned into a, you know, beatified or whatever. And it turned out that not only had she self-inflicted her stigmata, she was also carrying on a torrid affair with her underling in the guise of an angel by the name of Splenditello. But because there were no laws on the books against lesbianism, there were many laws against male homosexuality, but in medieval times, they didn't really think that women were interested in sex. So there were no laws against lesbianism. So they couldn't burn her at the stake or kill her in some other way. So instead, they put her in isolation for like 30 years. And I've always thought that this would make a really beautiful opera. Because in a way, my understanding of Benedetta, of this woman, is that she had authentic visions and authentic faith that she had to falsify in order for it to be legible to the powers that be. That's my take on her. Similarly, in order for her to have sex with Bartolomea, her assistant, she had to do it in the guise of the angel Splenditello, right? It's not, so there's this sense of there's a real experience, and the only way she can manifest that real experience is to falsify it. And I'm totally taken with the idea of understanding female ambition as fundamentally oppositional, fundamentally problematic. And maybe that takes us back to, you know, my fights with Mr. Boyd and Mr. Cook, you know, in 1975, you know, that in some way, my ambition is not legible to the standard picture. And so I identify with that, with Benedetta. And so, yeah, so I had the idea of doing that in my early 30s and didn't find the right librettist, the right collaborator. And what I've come to understand is that, and this I also learned from Lee Brewer, I have like 10 projects in my head of things that I really want to do before I die. but it's clear to me that I need to prioritize which one to do, not on the basis of how interested I am or how excited I am about that particular project, but having the right collaborators.
Mm.
Finally found the right collaborator.
Yeah, so it comes to life in the best way possible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we're embarking on this collaboration. She's a Jennifer Krasinski is her name. I met her at McDowell. She's working on a novel that's also about female mystics in a sort of non-standard way.
Mhm.
And she's the ideal collaborator for this project.
Amazing.
Feel it. And so I'm really excited at the idea that I can do this project. And in a certain way, I think it changes it very much because I'm now the age that Benedetta was at the end of her 30 years in isolation,
Wow.
rather than at the beginning of her 30 years in isolation. And that's going to change, I think, the whole what the project is and what it means.
Yeah. Yeah, doing this when you were 30 versus now. Yeah. Yeah, it's like the timing is also just I don't know if it's as important, but it's also just as impactful on as the collaborator. It's like really does make a difference in when these things come to fruition. That's awesome.
And I guess that leads to the second question Norma asked. I am thinking about what work is it meaningful for me to do at this stage of my life, which feels like it's a very particular moment where I am, officially an old person, right? I started Medicare, 3 months ago or whatever. And yet I don't feel old at all. Like I have no physical ailments that make me feel like an old person yet. But I'm also fully aware that my time is limited. And that is a new sensation. Like I didn't calculate 10 years ago, oh, my time is limited, what are my priorities? But now that begins to enter my mind that I don't have, an endless number of 5-year projects, left to do. That just is not realistic. To imagine that, that I have 10 5-year projects is not feasible, obviously. Um, and so trying to think clearly and honestly and meaningfully about how I do want to spend the time I have left and what it means to what that does to my expression, what that does to the things that work that I make, is something that I'm preoccupied with thinking through.
Mm.
And it's sort of intensified by the fact that I have this project called A Book of Days that's on my website. Like anyone can sign up for it. And the way it's set up is that there's a piece, ultimately, God willing, a piece for every day of the year. Right now, there's like 160. I'm not even halfway through. But the earliest piece is a student piece from 1979. And the last piece will be whatever the last piece is that I write.
Right.
And they cycle around in no particular order, but they end up being sort of little manifestations of one life, my life, lived in terms of my preoccupations and the things I care about. And and so there is a sense that my work isn't just individual pieces, it's also a whole project. It's a life's work as well as the individual pieces that I've made. And that's something I'm thinking about in the
Mhm.
sense of what does the individual work mean in isolation, and what does it mean in this trajectory?
Hmm.
I don't know.
Yeah. Do you ever do any of these 5-year projects at the same time? Or does it take like your full attention to just lock into one?
No, in fact, I'm working on another 5-year project that I'm like a year and a half into. And yeah, so they're all in various
Since they're staggered, got it,
stages. Yeah,
stages.
yeah,
I
yeah,
see. Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah. No, I
Well,
never am working on one like that.
yeah.
And that would be kind of awesome, but it doesn't really happen. Yeah.
Well, Norma says that's brilliant subject matter for the opera. She's thrilled to hear about it.
Norma. I thought you might be pleased. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, so yeah, I think just, with a few minutes left, if you want to leave us all with a book or a movie, a piece of art, a podcast, something that you either turn to or enjoy, gathering inspiration from. I know you talked about what is inspiring you right now with your upcoming project, but other content or things that you like to take in.
Yeah, rather than naming one thing, I'm
Yeah.
so not good at that. I'll tell you this nerdy thing that I do.
Uh-huh.
Um, so back in the day when we all had CDs, I ripped all my CDs to MP3s, and so I have a hard drive with like 50,000 tracks
Wow.
on it. And because I'm a nerd, um, what I have done is I set it up so that each month, like, okay, we're in March, right? So I take all the track threes, um, well, not all of them, but a selection of track 3 because it's
Mhm.
March, mod 12 because some CDs have more than 12 tracks, so you have to
Right.
do it 12. So 3, 15,
15.
etc.
Yeah.
And the ones that are rated 5 stars, the ones that I've already rated 5 stars, I listen to every year. The things that I've rated 4 stars, I listen to every 2 years. And then there are, of course, I haven't listened to all 50,000 tracks. So there are unlistened tracks. And so each month at the start of the month, I make this semi-randomized playlist that includes the 5-star things, 4-star things, and unrated things. And so it's a different selection every year, right?
Yeah.
That's going to rotate through. Um, and then that's my playlist. So instead of turning on Spotify and say, listen to Sufjan Stevens
Yeah.
radio hour, whatever, um, um, I do this. And what it means is that there's this sort of combination of things I already know I love because I've rated them 4 stars, with new things that I've never listened to before. And the sort of chance operation of what's next to each other is ever changing so that you never hear anything in the same context twice.
Right.
And so I'll be working on a particular project and something will come on that has nothing that I would never have chosen consciously to go and say,
Right.
oh, I need to listen to Pat Metheny right now. I mean, this happened just the other day. I was driving and I'm working on this project with this amazing medieval singer on this, that my show is this 14th century French composer, and we're sort of doing a queerified version of my show's warranty. I won't talk about that.
Cool.
But and I heard this Pat Metheny thing, and the way he had mixed the guitar with the vocal, I was like, oh, we have to steal that. Like, we have to steal that. And like, Pat Metheny has nothing to do with my show, like
Right.
nothing.
Yeah.
So to me, it is that the frisson of these bizarre things that don't belong together getting put together is like thrilling to me and gives
Right.
me so much happiness, right?
Mhm.
And so I guess my recommendation is to like make weirdly randomized playlists that include the full range of every kind of music that you like, or think you might like, or even think you don't like, because it'll do stuff to your mind
Mhm.
that that will change your life. I mean, it's like really fun.
That's amazing. I love that ritual each year and that it always turns out differently. And when you say track three, are they saved just by their track number so you don't know what song it is, or do you see the titles?
That's actually that's I'm so glad you asked that question. I choose them, their titles are there, all the metadata is there.
Oh,
But when
okay.
I'm driving, I turn I turn off the display that
Yeah.
shows what they are, because if there are other people in the car, we play a game that is such a fun game, which is to try to guess who the artist is. And if we have no idea who the artist is, then we try to guess what decade it's from,
Hmm.
country it's from, and try to narrow it down, or what, yeah, like whatever,
That's
whatever,
amazing.
you know, and that itself is also this fascinating game because you also learn about what other people in the car know, right? I mean, I was
Hmm.
doing it with my bandmates going to a gig up and, we had an 8-hour drive to Maine a couple of weeks ago. And there was a guy I'd never played with before, and I had no idea what his range of listening was. And he's like, "Oh, that's Edvard Grieg," and I'm like, he's a violinist. How does he know Edvard Grieg piano music, obscure piano music? It's like really impressed.
That's amazing. Yeah, you get to know the people
Yeah,
just as much. That's great.
yeah.
Well, thank you, Eve. I really appreciate your time. This was wonderful. I loved hearing about your work and what inspires you and what's to come. Please let us know as these things come out or, are released so we can share them with the alumni community. I know that they'll be excited. We actually, I did this with Maya Jasper White a couple weeks ago. She's a
Uh-huh.
violinist. And then Rena Eshmail, she's class
Yes,
of '01. She
yes. We're
she
gonna
was
have
here.
dinner on Sunday.
Oh,
Yeah,
amazing.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
she was here a couple weeks ago speaking to some students. So
Oh, that's awesome.
it's definitely been like a music heavy month for the alumni community, which is
This is a
awesome.
good thing, a good,
Yeah.
yeah. All right.
Well,
Well,
thank you.
thank
This
you so much.
recording will be live on the website, so alums can watch it.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie. This was really fun.
Okay, have a great
Have
rest
a
of your
great
day.
day.
Bye.